Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I appreciate Senator Hewitt joining us. Senator Hewitt grew up in South Louisiana in Lake Charles and moved to the North Shore. She's a state senator elected in, was it 2015? 2015, representing St. Tammany, Plaquemines, Orleans, and St. Bernard.
Yes.
Parishes, so 4 of our parishes in the New Orleans area. Mr. Chairman, one thing I want to note, I'm looking at the witnesses here, and we have 3 witnesses that do not have energy production, expressing concerns about what may happen. Senator Hewitt actually doesn't just live in the community where energy production occurs. I'm sorry.
On offshore.
Offshore, yes, please, thank you. And worked in the industry for 20 years, helping to improve the efficiency and safety, and is a leader in our legislature on education issues. And so I really look forward to actually having an expert in this field to testify today. Senator Hewitt, thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, Congressman.
Thank you. And now, Senator Hewitt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. Good morning, Chairman Lowenthal, Ranking Member Gosar, and members of the committee. My name is Sharon Hewitt. I'm a state senator from Slidell, Louisiana, representing the coastal parishes of St. Tammany, Orleans, Plaquemine, and St. Bernard. And I'm a former engineering executive for a major oil company responsible for managing major deepwater oil and gas assets in the Gulf of Mexico, as Congressman Graves said. Thank you. As the committee considers bills that will affect leasing and seismic activity in the OCS, I urge you to consider the positive economic impact that the oil and gas industry has had on our country and on my home state of Louisiana. Production from the Gulf of Mexico has fueled our nation's energy security and independence. Since the first offshore well was drilled 70 years ago, 90% of the crude oil produced in the United States has been produced from the Gulf of Mexico. Today, the Gulf of Mexico accounts for 17% of the crude produced in the United States. As the #1 oil producer and the #2 gas producer in the OCS, Louisiana delivers more revenue from offshore production to the federal treasury than any other state, in excess of $7 billion a year. In addition to its contribution to the U.S. economy, the oil and gas industry, including pipeline and refining activities, has a $70 billion annual impact on the Louisiana economy and pays $2 billion per year in taxes and fees. Furthermore, not only is Louisiana an energy state, but we're also known as the sportsman's paradise because of our relentless efforts to balance offshore oil and gas operations with environmental stewardship. Louisiana is the #1 commercial fish landings by weight in the lower 48 states. Our commercial fishermen harvest over 2 billion pounds of fish and shellfish a year, representing nearly 30% of the commercial fish landings of the continental U.S. Wildlife recreation, which includes hunting, fishing, and wildlife watching, has amounted to a $3 billion industry, supporting over 25,000 jobs. A prime example of the symbiotic relationship between the oil and gas industry and the sportsman fishermen is the Louisiana Artificial Reef Program. In this program, oil and gas platforms with no future utility are decommissioned and converted into artificial reefs to provide new habitats for fish and marine life. Oil and gas companies donate 1/2 of the realized savings over the cost of a traditional platform removal into the trust fund, which is used to build and monitor the inshore, nearshore, and offshore artificial reefs. Thirdly, production in the Gulf of Mexico is critical to saving Louisiana's coast and our coastal communities through revenue-sharing programs like the 2006 Gulf of Mexico Energy Security Act, GO-MESA. In this program, a portion of the federal royalties paid by oil and gas operators on offshore production is shared with the coastal states in recognition of their contributions to the nation's energy security and independence. In Louisiana, funding from GO-MESA is dedicated to coastal restoration and protection projects at the state and local level, and it's expected to be $118 million in fiscal year 2020. The Land and Water Conservation Fund was established by Congress in 1964 to fulfill a bipartisan commitment to safeguard our natural areas, water resources, and cultural heritage, and to provide recreation opportunities for all Americans. This fund invests earnings from offshore oil and gas leases and has funded over $4.2 billion for more than 43,000 conservation projects throughout the nation since its inception. Looking ahead, while multiple sources of energy will continue to be needed to advance the world's growing energy demands, the demand for oil and gas is projected to still constitute more than 50% of the world's energy needs in 2040, according to the International Energy Agency's new policy scenario. Without an additional investment of roughly $10 trillion, the IEA forecasts that there will be an 88 million barrel of oil per day shortfall in 2040 due to the expected decline of the existing well production. Expanding the current federal leasing program will allow the United States to meet this growing demand for not just power and fuel, but for consumer goods such as electronics, medicines, plastics, and clothing that are manufactured from fossil fuels. It is my hope that Louisiana's success in effectively achieving this balance between industry and the coastal communities can be an example of what the United States can achieve in other federal offshore areas. In my opinion, coastal communities do not need to be protected from offshore drilling, but instead should partner with offshore operators to identify synergies for the benefit of all of our citizens. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my statement. I look forward to any questions from you or members of the committee.
Thank you, Senator Hewitt.
Senator Hewitt, let me ask you a few questions. You come from a state that is doing what we've now been told is humanly impossible. You have tourism, you have the fishing industry, and you have energy production. How in the hell do you, state of Louisiana, balance those three things and do it effectively?
Well, we do it very carefully. You know, it's not that difficult, and we have 70 years of experience doing it. And so, you know, I would say to, you know, those states that are represented that are fearful of the unknown, look to Louisiana. We have done it, and, you know, we excel in all of those areas. You know, there's plenty of state regulations, federal regulations. You could coexist, and we found, again, a lot of synergies between those different industries that I think allow us to excel.
The oil industry does have well-paid jobs, but are there other benefits that the state receives from oil and gas production on federal waters?
Well, it's a tremendous economic boost. There's certainly a lot of indirect jobs, as you pointed out, you know, that are related to the oil and gas industry. It's an entire business. You know, it's interesting. I had actually a dentist in central Louisiana tell me the other day when oil prices dropped, his business dropped. He's in central Louisiana. You wouldn't normally think of a dentist as really being one of those indirect jobs, but it is the lifeblood of our state. It has been the primary industry in our state, and I believe it will be for many, many years to come.
Would there need to be statutory changes made for other states to benefit from energy production off their coast the way the Gulf states do?
Well, GOMESA has been a wonderful thing for us. You know, we get, you all I'm sure understand how GOMESA works, but 37.5% of the royalty that is paid on offshore oil production actually comes back to the coastal states, and Louisiana gets the predominant share of that. So statutorily, those states that participated in offshore drilling, I would assume, would want to broaden the GOMESA Act to be able to benefit as well from that. Although it's interesting, I should point out, as you know, the onshore states are getting 50% back. We're only getting 37.5% back in offshore waters, which we believe is a little bit unfair.
Thank you, and I'm sure if you weren't to tell me that, Mr. Graves would be sure that he would tell me that,
Senator,
too.
can you talk in your 20 years in the energy industry and just share some of your opinions or what you've seen in terms of the culture of safety in that business?
Well, no one wants to be safer than an offshore oil and gas worker because you want everyone to go home. And I will tell you that the safety culture is such that anyone at any time can stop any operation because of a safety concern. And it is taught on a daily basis, it is lived, and it is something that I've personally been responsible for in offshore operations. And I will tell you the safety, they continue to improve their safety records offshore in terms of recordable incidents and preventable accidents, and I believe you could hold up that industry to many, many other industries in terms of their safety record, and it would be extremely competitive.
What do these charts tell you about the trajectory of the global energy consumption and whether or not renewables will be able to meet those rising demands?
Well, I think, the data is pretty clear in the forecast here. When you look ahead to 2040, certainly there is going to be a growing energy demand worldwide, and renewables are increasing, as are, oil and gas. You can't get there with just renewables. You cannot get there with just renewables. As you pointed out, the population is increasing. You cannot do it with just renewables. You're going to always have, in the foreseeable future, a need for oil and gas. Now, here's the other part of it. If you look at that top chart, the darker blue in the bottom left corner of that top chart is the existing supply of oil and gas. So as those wells' production declines, the only way to continue to keep that wedge of oil and gas delivered is to drill new wells. And so that's what the light blue represents up there. It's a $10 trillion investment between now and 2040 to continue to meet the oil and gas demand that's going to be required, because, again, the renewables and coal and other sources cannot deliver what the world is going to need.
So, Senator Hewitt, with a state like Louisiana, if we forgo the baseload power like oil and gas, how will we reach our demand? I mean, so how do we make this work?
Well, I think we do continue to have an all-of-the-above energy strategy, and I agree with that. In my home district, we have a company that's building some of the largest windmill turbine blades in the country. We have solar panels. We're exploring all different types of energy, but there's always going to be a need for fossil fuels, and we need to be able to open up other parts of the ocean so that we can explore for those, because we are blessed, our country is blessed with natural resources, and I can't imagine a country such as Venezuela, living in a country like Venezuela, where you have rolling blackouts. Energy is such a fundamental need, and to not explore it and provide for our citizens is just sort of difficult for me to understand.
Well, and finally, the concluding words, Senator Hewitt.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, for those states that are importing oil and gas, I'd like to offer the services of the state of Louisiana. We are about to become the single largest exporter of liquefied natural gas, and it is clean energy, and we'd be happy to make that available to those instead of importing. I wanted to touch on seismic briefly, because I know that's part of the legislation you all are considering, and we did not talk about that any. As you know, seismic surveys are a blast of air that sends a sound wave through the earth that allows us to model the land below, and if there's any oil or gas or water in the land. The concern sometimes is raised about the impact of that on marine mammals. We've been doing this for 50 years. I'm going to say that there's no scientific evidence that shows the risk of direct physical injury to marine mammals is extremely low, and that there's also no scientific evidence that demonstrates biologically significant negative impacts on marine life. And so I would submit to you that we need seismic data to better understand the opportunities that are available to us. It's just like having a world-class hospital and not allowing people to do MRIs or ultrasounds. We need the ability to be able to better understand and model the opportunities that are available. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.